When we bring people to visit San Francisco today, besides going to all the great sites, when it becomes time to eat, we generally get them down to Fisherman's Wharf because of our fish. One of the great, wonderful things that still exists today that existed during my ancestors' time: shellfish, lobster, crab, mussel, oyster, abalone. Then you think of the sturgeon and the salmon. A great diet filled with cholesterol, but it was here and it still is here. The other thing is the acorn that grew on the oak trees. There wasn't corn in California. The acorn was our staple of life. It grew on the oak tree. The acorn would be harvested during the fall, and inside an acorn, like a walnut or an almond, there's a soft meal that needs to be pulverized once you crack the shell open. And then that pulverized flour can be made into bread, into cakes, into cereal, all the things that we would use for grain to make today. The wildlife. Here in San Francisco, we know that there was bear, fox, elk, venison, deer, all these animals. Rabbits. Rabbit skins made the greatest blankets. And the meat is good too. So the world was involved with all the animals and the plants. The yerba buena tea that still grows, the yerba buena plant that you can make tea out of. If you take the bark of a willow tree, within it is the same contents of acid that today our doctors call aspirin. And so the medical world could also be taken care of from the native plant world. So there were all these wonderful things that lent itself to life. My ancestors were not so much farmers. They did not have to plant the crops. They did manage the environment. There were the annual managing of the various plants that grew so that the basket weavers could get what they needed and to make sure that they grew. There was the actual annual burning off of the dead grasses to regenerate the seeds so the plants would come back again the next year. So I would say my ancestors managed the environment.
I'd like to share with you a little bit about the Shoshonean people. Both of my identities, Shoshone, the Shoshone component of my identity, and the Bannock component of my identity are of the Uto-Aztecan people. Uto-Aztecan people share commonalities in many of their foods, many aspects of their cultures, and as you know, in different areas, they may add to their diet. But we do have the general beliefs about food. There's certain foods we don't eat, and there's certain foods that we do eat. But our commonality is, number one, the salmon. Fish. Fish is a very important component of our culture because Native American people, especially of the Shoshonean people, if they have access to it, respect the fish because the fish was the first one who gave of himself to feed the people. We eat a lot of roots. We know wild onions, wild carrots. We collect bitterroot, anything that is within the root basis. We also eat berries that are in our areas. We eat, for example, we know that a lot of the California Shoshones have eaten acorn, and then we know the Nevadas eat pine nuts. And then the Shoshones further up eat a different kind of, we eat, like, for example, chokecherry, which is real predominant for us, manzanita here, and blackberry, and so it just varies.
We had a couple lagoons that we were really into the lagoon part of it, and there was a lot of fishing in Thule boats. There's actually a lot of fishing along the San Luis Rey River, but it's not your typical fishing. I remember 20, 30 years ago, I was up at La Jolla Reservation at their campgrounds, and I was on the river there, and I was watching these people fishing with the fishing poles, and had their lines, and they're just sitting there waiting for something to happen. And then 2 Indian men went walking down the river, and 2 Indian women were on the shore, one on each side with gunny sacks. And the men were just reaching in the rocks and pulling out these catfish and throwing them on the shore, and the women were putting them in the bags. And they caught like 4 or 5 fish as they passed these fishermen. And the fishermen would look at their poles and look at the water and look at their poles. So our way of fishing wasn't real patient all the time. We made abalone fish hooks, stringed on strings, and we would fish well in the lagoons, and then we did go in the ocean. We had, again with Thule boats, but they had a willow reinforcement frame. So it was actually a frame built out of willow branches, or not branches, but wood, and with the bundles of Thule tied on to the frame.
The staples being the oak. We would go into the mountains to get oak, either side of the pass, and pinon pines up in San Bernardino mountains, and mesquite to the east of us. And in fact, my great-grandfather, I think, transplanted some mesquite to his allotments, and they're still there now. And I keep talking about trying to bring them back and start using mesquite more. You know, right now I purchase flour from an anthropologist who does all the work. She goes out in the field and collects and grinds and sells it. So I started doing that, buying it from her.